What if I told you that the most shocking thing about the second week in Bahrain was not a better time, but Frédéric Vasseur's reaction when Lewis Hamilton got off the SF-26? Because we're not talking about a quick turnaround for the gallery. We are talking about something much deeper. From a team leader who does not usually exaggerate, admitting that he was surprised by the speed with which Hamilton managed to understand, adjust and make the car work in long runs, with changes in conditions and without losing consistency. In preseason, the one who sets the best time does not win. The one who understands the car before anyone else wins. And what happened in that second week in Bahrain could completely change Ferrari's narrative for 2025. The second week of testing in Bahrain was not just any week. It wasn't simply more mileage, more simulations, or more laps accumulated in an endless table of data. It was the moment when the masks began to fall. The teams had already tested basic concepts in the first phase. They had already detected structural weaknesses, and they already knew where they were losing performance. The second week was the time to tune up, to compare directly with the rivals, and above all, to understand if the car had a real basis or if it was an illusion built with low fuel and made-up programs. In that scenario, Ferrari did not arrive as an undisputed favorite or as an absolute cover. He came with questions. Questions about the integration of Lewis Hamilton. Questions about whether the SF-26 would have a wider operating window than its predecessor. Questions about whether they could really stand up to a McLaren that seemed to hide pace or a Red Bull that continued to accumulate laps like a perfectly calibrated machine. And that's where the narrative began to change. During the second day of that second week, the competitive context was especially revealing. Mercedes placed a car at the top of the table. McLaren stayed close. Red Bull worked with a huge volume of laps, reinforcing its usual methodology of extensive simulations. And Hamilton closed the day just behind Verstappen, in a position that, on paper, doesn't scream dominance, but does suggest something much more important: consistency within an extremely demanding environment. On a day where it was not enough to set an isolated time, but rather the focus was on long runs and indirect pace comparisons, Ferrari appeared in the serious conversation. This is where the element that surprised Vasseur comes in. In preseason, the real value is not in a brilliant lap on a new tire. It's in repeatability. In the ability to nail rhythms lap after lap. In understanding how the tire evolves when the track changes. In knowing which small adjustments generate large effects and which are simply statistical noise. And Hamilton within days began delivering exactly that: clarity. He wasn't forcing the car to fit his style. He was shaping his piloting to extract useful information and return it to the team accurately. The most relevant thing about this second week was not a spectacular flash, but the absence of chaos. There were no symptoms of disorientation. There were no contradictory comments. There wasn't that feeling of a pilot still looking for basic references. What was seen was a 7-time world champion working as if he had been involved in the project for months. Adjusting balance at curve entry and exit. Understanding energy management in long stints. Evaluating degradation without dramatizing each performance drop. And that, for a team leader, is worth more than any starter. While the media environment tried to build parallel narratives about their adaptation or the internal dynamics of the team, inside the garage the feeling was different. Vasseur even had to come out publicly to stop certain stories, insisting that the collaboration on the wall was good and that Hamilton's mental state was very positive. This detail is not minor because it indicates that the noise was outside, not inside. And when in Ferrari the noise is outside and not inside, that is already a sign of stability. The second week in Bahrain, then, did not define definitive hierarchies. He did not proclaim Ferrari as the car to beat. But he did make something clear. Hamilton's adaptation process was going faster than expected. And in a championship where the first races can mark inertia that is difficult to break, starting with that solid foundation can mean much more than it seems when cold. In Bahrain, while other teams were still evaluating basic concepts or racking up almost mechanical mileage, Hamilton was already entering a different phase, the refinement phase. And that is what completely changes the reading. I wasn't simply learning where the car brakes or how it responds in slow corners. I was working on how to make it more stable in the long stint, how to make it more predictable when degradation started to appear, how to balance aggressive entry with exit traction without punishing the rear axle. And this is where the technical detail becomes crucial. In long runs, the information returned by a pilot can be confusing if it does not yet have clear references. You may receive ambiguous comments, unstable, nervous, difficult to read. But when a pilot has already found the base, the feedback changes its nature. It becomes surgical. It gets specific. And that was what surprised Vasseur. How quickly Hamilton stopped talking in general terms and started talking in terms of fine-tuning. In an environment where aerodynamic balance can vary with just a small change in height or rake, where the tire's thermal window dictates half a second per lap, having a driver who understands that language from the start accelerates weeks of work. And Ferrari, historically, has suffered when the car had a narrow operating window. What was seen in this second week was different. Hamilton did not seem to be fighting against an impossible window. It seemed to be working within a usable base. Furthermore, the competitive context reinforced the pressure. Mercedes was showing solid signs. McLaren seemed to hide real performance in simulations. Red Bull continued to be methodical, accumulating data with Verstappen as an absolute reference. In the middle of that board, Ferrari needed more than just stability. He needed signs that his 2025 project would not depend solely on individual talent, but on total alignment between driver and structure. And here comes a key point: emotional management. Vasseur made it clear that Hamilton was in a very good mental state and that internal collaboration was positive. That's not a decorative phrase. At Ferrari, the environment can become suffocating when expectations skyrocket. If the second week had shown frustration, doubts, or imbalances, the noise would have exploded. Instead, what was transmitted from within was serenity, methodical work, incremental progress. That type of environment is what allows real performance to be built. Act 2, then, is not about timing. It's about direction. It's about whether Ferrari is simply reacting to what McLaren and Red Bull are doing, or whether it's starting to define its own technical path with a driver who understands exactly what he needs to fight for a championship. Because there is a huge difference between having a fast car in February and having a car that you know how to develop in April. And what the second week in Bahrain left is the feeling that Hamilton is not just driving the SF-26, is helping to shape it. In the preseason, nobody wins championships, but trends are detected. And what this second week left is something much more important than a position in the table. It left the feeling that Ferrari, for the first time in a long time, is not improvising. Vasseur was surprised by the speed with which Hamilton managed to get the car running in long programs and with changes in conditions, highlighting that in testing the fundamental thing is not the peak lap, but repeatability and technical clarity. That phrase, red cold, may seem moderate, but within the Ferrari context, it's huge, because Ferrari in recent years has had speed. He has had pole positions. He's had brilliant weekends. What it has not always had is structural stability. What it has not always had is a clear technical base from the start of the season. And when that fails, development becomes reactive. Symptoms are corrected rather than causes resolved. What was seen in this second week is different. Hamilton didn't seem to be discovering the car. He seemed to be working on a basis he already understood. That means that when the first races arrive, Ferrari won't be starting from scratch every Friday. It means the team can focus on optimizing rather than deciphering. And that completely changes the scenario. As Red Bull remains heavily reliant on Verstappen's ability to extract performance in imperfect conditions, and as McLaren tries to confirm whether its long-run advantage is structural or circumstantial, Ferrari could be building something more dangerous: competitive predictability. Because the biggest enemy of an aspiring team is not being half a second slower. It's not understanding why it is. If Hamilton is already providing clear feedback, if the internal collaboration is solid, and if the mental state is positive as Vasseur advocated, then Ferrari has something that is not measured in stopwatches: direction. And when you have direction, development stops being a bet and becomes a plan. Act 3 is not about Bahrain. It's about what comes next. If this adaptation occurred in a matter of days, if the driver-team connection is aligned before the first serious Grand Prix, then Ferrari will not arrive at the first races looking for answers. It will arrive looking to confirm hypotheses. And that is a gigantic difference. The big unknown now is this: was it simply a good second week of testing? Or have we just witnessed the first real indication that Ferrari with Hamilton can sustain a season-long title bid? Frédéric Vasseur was surprised by the speed with which Lewis Hamilton managed to get the SF-26 working in long runs, in demanding programs, with changes in conditions, highlighting that in preseason what really matters is repeatability and technical clarity. And that surprise was not theatrical. It was structural. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.